In the late 10th century, a bishop called Burchard of Worms wrote down a shopping list of sins. He wrote down loads of stuff that he thought the people around him were doing wrong, that he really didn't want them to do, and he assigned to each of them a penance. What penance do you have to do to make amends for having done this wrong thing, or this wrong thing, or this wrong thing? And this is wonderful because it tells us exactly what a bishop, towards the end of the early Middle Ages, thought all of his people around him were doing wrong, and how relatively wrong each of those are. Great. If we want to create cool, supernatural, medieval role-playing games, the really interesting stuff is all of the superstitions and the magic. And he talks a lot about magic. He talks about people thinking they can perform certain magical feats. He talks about, you need as a priest to find out if anybody is climbing up onto their roof, drawing a circle in the air with their sword and demanding that spirits come to them. Now, this isn't peasant women doing this in secret. If you've got a sword towards the end of the early Middle Ages, you are part of the warrior elite. So this is people of all sorts of social classes that he's focusing on with different anecdotes. Now, one of the weirdest, and therefore absolutely the one that we took for the Medieval Knights anthology, is where he says, there are some women who believe that as they lie in bed at night with their husbands, so these are mature married women, as they lie in bed at night with their husbands, they can go forth from their bodies invisibly and pass through walls and seek out people who are their enemies and rip from their chests their hearts, and they eat those hearts and they replace them with wooden fake hearts, control mechanisms. He's not quite sure why they're replacing them, but they're replacing them with bits of wood. And then they return to their beds. And Burchard says, if you've got anybody in your congregation who thinks they can do this, they're absolutely deluded. That's totally ridiculous. Make sure they understand how stupid this is. Assign a fairly hefty penance to them to make sure that they're genuinely penitent, and so they remember not to be morons again in future. And hopefully we can stamp out this kind of ridiculous superstition. Now, from a role-playing point of view, which is more interesting? There are women who think they can do this, but they're deluded and wrong and stupid, and it's just superstition. Or there is at least one woman who can do this, and we can get an adventure out of that. Yeah, we're going for the second of those. So for medieval knights, we assume that there is a peasant woman who can project herself forth, kind of astral projection, devour someone's heart and replace it with something that gives them some sort of power over them. Now, this gives us some mooks, whoever she's got power over, that can be the people who the players are initially up against. Then the players find the bodies after they've killed these people, or they capture them and they examine them, and they find that they've got scars on their chests and that their hearts aren't beating, and if they examine further they'll find that there's a wooden heart in there instead of a normal heart. And then this takes them to the big bad, the peasant woman. That's pretty obvious, and that's okay. Right, players will enjoy it, you get some initial fights with some mooks, and then you uncover the evil sorceress kind of figure. But we want to make this more interesting, and we want to keep this focused on the Middle Ages. Because yes, we're looking at Burchard of Worms as a medieval writer who gives us an interesting set of ideas that we wouldn't normally think of, and from this we have a slightly unusual plot. Okay? But we can get more interesting from the Middle Ages than that. Because if we look at any medieval or medieval fantasy setting, the consistent feature in almost all of these settings that we use for role-playing games is a version of feudalism. Feudalism is the wrong word, it wasn't really an ism, it was more kind of a set of guidelines and common practices. But what we're talking about is a load of nobles, kings, dukes, counts, barons, knights, who extract from the peasants economic surplus. They then use that economic surplus to fortify their own military might. They have chainmail, they have castles, they have war horses, they hire mercenaries, they maintain soldiers. And then they use that military might to protect the peasants from all the other nobles who are going to come along and try and take the land and the wealth. Right? So a simplistic view of feudalism is it's just a protection racket. This is a bunch of powerful thugs who've got the military might. They extract surplus wealth from the peasants as much as they can, and then they use that to ensure that they stay in charge. And if you do not toe the line, they will kill you, because they have control of all the weapons, all the soldiers, and the justice system. And medieval justice isn't particularly just from a modern point of view. If that is all that feudalism is, how is that different from a peasant woman using magical powers to say to people, you will do what I say, you will go out and you will get wealth from me, you will go out and take stuff for me, you will give me your stuff, because otherwise I'll mess you up with my magic powers. Why has she done this thing to their hearts? Is this so she can control them? Is it so she can kill them if they don't obey her? We've got a sort of analogue for the feudal system here. This isn't brave knights in shining armour pretending that their actions are somehow heroic and honourable when actually they're just a bunch of brutal thugs stealing economic surplus. This is a peasant woman who quite unashamedly is saying, you will do what I say or I will mess you up. And this therefore gives us, if the players are interested, and they don't have to, right, this is optional, but this gives us the potential for the players to reflect on how the feudal system works, how their medieval world works. All these noble, glorious knights and people who give themselves posh titles, how are they different to this peasant woman? How are they different to this witch? Now, actually, the feudal system isn't just an extortion racket. It is an extortion racket, but it isn't just an extortion racket. What this woman is doing is just an extortion racket. So we create an adventure which starts from this wonderfully weird medieval anecdote from Burchard of Worms, that there are women who think they can do this crazy thing. And then we use that to allow the players to reflect as much as they wish on whether might makes right. What is the feudal system? Are the people in charge of their world actually making the world better? Are they all just brutal thugs? Now, where they go with that, what their conclusions are, is entirely up to them. But this allows us to start with a really cool anecdote, give the players a really clear adventure with mooks and a big bad at the end, which also allows them to reflect on and understand more deeply the oddities of the world that they're playing in.